are listening to the Down the Wormhole podcast, exploring the strange and fascinating relationship between science and religion. This week, we are exploring how that relationship gets worked out in real life with one of the current Sinai and Synapses fellows. Sinai and Synapses is a 2-year fellowship committed to elevating the discourse surrounding religion and science, and where the 5 of us first met. So, without further ado, our guest today is the Raymond F. Schinazi Scholar in Bioethics and Jewish Thought in the Center for Ethics at Emory University. He's the professor of medicine and of religion and is the founding director of the Food Studies and Ethics program at Emory University. In addition to being an ordained rabbi, he is the founder and co-editor of the Journal of Jewish Ethics and author of several books. I want to welcome to the podcast, Jonathan Crane.
Thank you so much for having me, Zach. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it is wonderful to finally get a chance to connect with you. You have a lot going on, it seems, in your biography. A lot of books being published, a lot of work being done in ethics, in religion, in medicine. You are an ordained rabbi as well as a full professor. Just figuring out where to start in in getting to know you a little bit better. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's occupying your headspace these days.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm very much interested in understanding how and why people are responding to current events as they do. And there are so many that are provoking us in a variety of different ways. Everything from the pandemic to racial tensions to ongoing conflicts to wars that are starting up and wars that are ending, to climate change, to how we are unfortunately getting increasingly sick from the food that our civilization feeds to us. And there's a whole host. The list goes on. And so I'm very curious about how we, as individuals, as communities, as societies, as countries, civilizations, respond to these challenges and what sort of resources we bring to bear on our deliberations through figuring out what to do with these circumstances, which ones we prioritize as more urgent, which ones we kick the can down the road and say that technology will solve it sometime in the future, and which ones we actually tell ourselves that this is the time and this is the place and we are the people to actually deal with the mess.
So in your professional opinion, how are we handling the current mess that we find ourselves?
It depends, of course, on whom you are talking about and which topics. I think some we are handling better, and certainly depending on the scale. So some institutions, schools or communities or cities or states, and even a few countries are dealing with their tensions and conflicts in very creative ways and are showing marked success toward reaching certain kinds of goals. So, for example, New Zealand has done an extraordinary job of protecting its population from the ravages of COVID-19, but it's done so at an expense of closing down international tourism. And so that itself demonstrates an ethical deliberation. They saw 2 things that are good. One is tourism, and the other good is their own public's health. And so they decided that in this instance, one should take priority when they are in tension with each other. Whereas other countries have decided to go different routes and prioritize other things instead of the public's health. And we can see how that plays out. So it really depends on what topic you want to focus in on and at what scale and what time frame before you can really begin to give the assessment on whether they are succeeding or not.
It seems there are a few countries in the world that handled the COVID outbreak worse than the United States. And that might just be biased because I'm in it. But it seems like the idea of there being something that we would have to collectively get behind and give up some of our individual liberties in order to better serve the whole is just so antithetical to this American cowboy spirit that we were sunk before the ship left the dock. Do you see any of of that in the why we were so poorly prepared and handled it so badly?
So different countries, and America is no exception here, champion different notions of success and what their national story is. So we do have this myth here in the United States of rugged individualism. And one of the challenges, and perhaps you can reflect on this too, is this pursuit of self-interest has amazing power, and it has developed incredible goods for America and Americans and the world writ large. But at the other hand, it also makes us extremely vulnerable, especially when there are challenges like a pandemic or a challenge like climate change that impact everyone, and no one can find safety because everybody is implicated and impacted by these challenges. So rugged individualism is now facing a challenge from outside of it. And one of the things that I have been impressed with are those communities here within the United States, sub-national communities, so certain cities or religious communities that have demonstrated that the pursuit of self-interest is perhaps not as good as the pursuit of enlightened self-interest. And when I say enlightened self-interest, it means taking other people's interests into consideration as well, like the public's interests. And so they adjust and make changes in their practices and in their policies so as to protect the community, as well as trying to champion individual pursuits as well.
Yeah, I've seen pockets of that as well. Do you think there's a generational gap here, that younger generations are more communally focused and older generations less so?
No, on the contrary, I think it's flipped.
No?
I think that at least here in the Atlanta area, I have seen the elderly population be much more vigilant and taking care of themselves and doing what is necessary, not only to take care of themselves, but to protect the public writ large and not engage in risky behaviors, I should say. Whereas younger generations, some of them understand the seriousness of this public health issue and also follow vigilant protocols. And then there are, I would say, a fairly sizable minority of younger populations that still engage in cavalier behavior.
That's interesting that you would say it that way, because it's been noted many times by folks that the younger generations are more globally minded, having grown up in a digital world, connected by the internet all the time. They think of themselves more as citizens of the world as opposed to citizens of a particular ethnic or local municipality. But when it comes to this particular crisis, that they are acting more reckless and less in terms of the collective good. And that's interesting. It seems like there's a lot of different factors at play in any particular crisis or
Well, I think you're right about that. And now that I'm thinking about it, I think that you're stumbling onto something really interesting here, is that perhaps the younger generations are more globally minded in regards to social and political issues. But when it comes to public health issues, to physical issues, about our bodily existence, I don't know whether that global mindedness translates. That there's something about the pre-digital person who's not a digital native, who has a greater sense of embodiment and understands just how radically vulnerable we are to each other and to the broader environment, that perhaps digital natives are less inherently attuned to.
Now that is something interesting to think about. as a person who is like a first generation digital, not really a digital native, what would you call someone who grew up analog and then turned digital in early teens? A digital colonist?
There you go.
I don't know. I can see both sides of that. I want to shift and ask you a question about something that you brought up a little bit earlier, talking about public health crises and how we deal with them. And you mentioned our modern world, our modern way of producing food and of eating, and how that is poisoning our bodies. And I know there's been a lot said on this topic, both scientifically and pseudoscientifically. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit to the scope of the work that you've done. I know you've written an entire book on ethical eating.
So that book, Eating Ethically, Religion and Science for a Better Diet, explores an old idea that the Abrahamic traditions championed many decades ago. Hundreds and thousands of years ago.
Many decades ago.
In a previous millennia, that built on an ancient Greek and Roman idea, classical idea of satiety, that one should eat until one is sated, and not until one has been glutted. And this notion of eating until one is sated, these religious traditions insist is a kind of eating strategy, a consumption strategy, where you listen to your body and your body tells you when you have eaten enough. And it does not mean that you have eaten enough. It does not mean that in this one particular meal you have eaten enough calories or eaten enough protein or eaten enough micronutrients. But on the whole, if one eats this way, eating until you have become sated, and you do this chronically, it is far healthier for your body than if you eat until you have filled your belly or glutted yourself. This is not to say that you should not eat an occasional festive meal. Indeed, every religious tradition mandates festive meals, like, for example, Easter feast, or the Eid at the end of Ramadan, or Passover meal. These feasts are designed specifically to be special, but they can only be special in the context of a calendar year where you are not eating a festive meal every single day. If you did that, that would be maladaptive biologically and also transgressive according to the religious traditions. And contemporary science of nutrition is corroborating this ancient idea that what is healthy, and also what these traditions say is what is holy, is actually biologically adaptive. Our bodies are designed to eat until we are sated, and only on occasion eat beyond that point. So the book tries to explore these ideas of the distinction between maladaptive and adaptive eating, between healthy and unhealthy eating, unholy and holy eating, and bring it together into conversation with contemporary science. And my teaching continues to explore some of these ideas. Here at Emory, I teach a variety of courses that a suite of courses that fold into the food studies and ethics program that we're trying to develop here. Because eating is a dynamic relationship, and any relationship is fraught with ethical decisions all the time. Eating is perhaps one of the most pursued relationships that we all, or engaged relationships that we have in our lives. And we need to take time in our lives, make time, and give ourselves the privilege, the opportunity to pay attention to where our food comes from, who is growing it, how does it get from farm to factory to the local restaurant and to your fork, and what are you doing with your fork? We need to be paying attention to all of these questions. So I think that industry and government itself have done extraordinary jobs in making the food system incoherent, obscure, really difficult to have access to. The meat industry is notorious for hiding behind high walls, both physical and legal, so much so that it is now a criminal activity to engage in investigative journalism into in certain states when you want to go investigate what's going on factory farming entities. So this does not breed transparency, and it certainly does not inculcate trust. And so this is killing us. It's making it difficult for us to trust the food system. It's making it difficult for us to trust not only what the food is and how it gets to us, but also what it's doing to us bodily. We can see it in our ballooning waistlines and our deteriorating health.
A lot of that sounds familiar. I think a lot of us have heard this call to more humane ways of treating animals and livestock, of more attentive ways to think about the things that we put in our bodies. But you mentioned a phrase that I don't know if I've heard before, holy eating. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how eating can be a holy practice.
So every religious tradition that I have come across spends a lot of time and energy and spills a lot of ink across time and space, thinking about what it means to be an eater of the world. The world, food has to be, if it's going to be food, it has to be not your own body that you're eating. So it can't be your fingernails. It can't be your finger. It can't be your arm. You got to eat something that's not you. And so that means that it's a relationship with something outside of yourself. And so these religious traditions, Eastern and Western, native and global, spend a lot of time thinking about what that relationship should look like. And they describe and prescribe what they consider to be appropriate ways of managing those consumptive relationships, eating. And so what eating looks like, say for Judaism, that's the tradition I'm most familiar with, looks a peculiar way in its details than, say, how a Christian might understand to be appropriate and holy eating. But that's not to say that Christianity and Judaism are mutually allergic about the importance of eating. They just have different details about how to think these things through. So when I say holy eating, I hold that religious traditions take eating very seriously. And our civilizations, our companies, try to do a lot of effort to make us forget those commitments that our traditions encourage us to think about, or they try to capitalize on them. And I think one of our challenges as creatures of the 21st century is to reclaim those tried and true religiously based notions of eating. They were developed over a lot of time and a lot of space for good reasons. And we should know that for the vast majority of these religious traditions, views on eating were developed in contexts of scarcity and agricultural vulnerability. They did not have big monocropping technologies. They did not have drip irrigation. They did not have aquaponics. They were exposed to the vagaries of the natural world. And they did not have supermarkets. And they certainly did not have 2-hour delivery systems to get what they wanted to their front doors. We live in a context, for the most part, of extraordinary superabundance. And eating just because we can is not necessarily eating everything that we can just because we can is maladaptive biologically and contrary to what our religious traditions teach us.
So if there's someone out there who would like to start thinking deeper about where their food comes from, who wants to change their purchasing habits such that it causes the least amount of suffering in the world. And so they go to the grocery store and they choose to spend an extra $1.50 on eggs that say cage-free or free range, or they decide to buy some bread that says no GMO or organic, or any number of these pictures and badges and signs and phrases that grace our foods these days. Do any of them mean anything? Like, can we trust those labels to help us to make better choices?
Well, we can trust them that they're trying to sell us something. Absolutely. You can trust the companies to market and attract and seduce and entice. Absolutely. There is only one term that has legal definition and teeth to it, and that is the term organic. In order for a product to claim that it is organic, it must meet certain legal standards of where its ingredients come from and how those ingredients are produced and manufactured. Everything else, any other marketing claim that is found on a package is just that. It is a marketing claim. There is no standards outside of that term. So anything that says that it's healthy, that it says that it's all natural, that it has no GMOs, that may or may not be true, but it doesn't mean anything. Anything that has corn in it is necessarily a GMO product, because contemporary corn is, unless it's some rare heritage breed, it is a genetically modified organism. So one would have to search far and wide to find products that are truly not impacted by, say, genetically modified efforts, technologies. So you asked, what can a person do? A person can look at their purchasing practices and figure out what their values are and what their highest priorities are, and figure out how their purchasing practices align with, reflect, and reinforce those values. I tell my students they should try, when they go to the local grocery store, is to just walk around the outside of the grocery store, the outermost layer. Do not go through the middle aisles of a grocery store, because those are usually where you find barcoded products. And those things that are barcoded are typically manufactured. And manufactured products are those that are, for the most part, unhealthy. The fresh produce is on the outside. The fresh dairy, the fresh meats, those are typically offered on the outside of grocery stores.
I remember some time ago there being some legal battle with McDonald's because they advertised their chicken nuggets as made with white meat or something, made with 100% white meat, and it was actually made with some slurry of chicken parts, but white meat was included in that. And so technically, by saying made with 100% white meat, they could say, like, no, we used 100% white meat in it. And so we didn't lie technically. It's just also bones and cartilage and things that are all chopped up, like dog food.
Exactly. So companies will go to great lengths, especially those companies that use animal products, will go to great lengths to misinform the public. And they do this for a variety of different reasons. We don't need to get into all of those details. It's complicated, but we should know that there are very creative industries that try to assuage consumer concerns and make them feel comfortable in buying their products.
It occurs to me as well that a lot of the places that have options of fresh ingredients and fresh produce and fresh locally sourced whatnot are places of privilege, of money, that there's a lot of places, especially in the cities, we call food deserts, where there's not a supermarket within the ability to get to without taking several buses. And you're kind of forced to get your food from the local bodega. And a lot of that is questionable at best. And the food that is more affordable because of government subsidies to things like corn and wheat are things that are almost completely just corn that is flavored in different ways to look like real food, but is not actually real food. So it strikes me that a lot of the fight to help America to figure out how to get its food priorities back in line is also an issue of justice for our underserved populations.
Yes, you're right. There's a lot of racism that's embedded in contemporary zoning, not just contemporary, but historical zoning practices about where grocery stores can and should be located. There were banking practices that allowed for certain kinds of businesses to be established in certain kinds of neighborhoods and not established in other kinds of neighborhoods. There's a lot of sexism that's involved in this, and educationism as well, about who can and should have rightful access to healthier foods. There's classism that's embedded in all of these practices as well. We should recognize that the history of the laws governing our contemporary food environment were designed precisely to continue to fatten the profits of the well-off for the corporations. There were very few incentives to actually democratize access, democratize the production of food, and that story is quite pronounced here in the South. Black farmers were notoriously kept out of gaining access to capital investments to improve their farms, and so they had to eventually sell them, and they become landless, and they had to find their economic wherewithal in urban areas, and so there are a fraction, just a tiny percentage of all American farmers are black or brown, even though many of the laborers are black and brown on farms. The people who actually own the farms or manage them are not minority populations. There's a historical a set of complicated interlocking stories about why this is the case. So you're pointing to exactly why we need to have not just a dispassionate investigation into these issues, but a real consideration of the ethics that have been involved in many of those decisions, and what should the ethical values be at play as we move forward.
And thinking globally as well, there's a lot of pushback in the United States right now about genetically modified plants. And I think a part of that is Monsanto is not helping by being a kind of a dastardly organization. But there's push on either side when places that are being ravaged by climate change, who are dealing with long periods of drought, who can't sustain their populations, they're being production of like vegetables that are more drought resistant through genetic modification, and using science and technology to make food easier to grow in needing less water for places. And then there are others that would say that, we don't know the long-term implications of people eating that kind of unnatural food, and we could be poisoning developing nations through this. Do you have any insights into that?
So I'm disinclined to speak about a particular company just because I don't know enough about what, say, Monsanto or other seed companies do. But it is, I think, right to say that we need to have a sincere conversation about the centralization of seeds for farming practices. That is a complicated story that needs to be investigated from a variety of different disciplinary approaches. But we also need to recognize that climate change is real and people need to feed themselves in a sustainable fashion, no matter where they are in the world. And that if science can help by creating drought-resistant or flood-resistant crops, then those are goods. We don't want to put so many regulations on genetically modifying organisms that it puts a chill effect on these kinds of research programs. So there are goods that can be done with genetically modified technologies in certain places at certain times.
I tend to be in that camp as well. I also tend to be somebody who trusts science a little bit too much, maybe. Just recognizing that technology is only as good as the benevolence of the people wielding it.
Well, on that point, I'm teaching a course here at Emory called Immoral Medicine. We're looking at the Nuremberg medical trials in 1946-47 about what the Nazis notoriously did during World War II to their own citizens, to indigenous non-German citizens, both in their clinics, their communities, as well as obviously in the concentration camps. And the vast majority of their victims in these biomedical experiments were Jews and political prisoners. But one of the things that we're coming to really appreciate in this course is that the Nazis were very much guided by a utilitarian ethic, that they wanted to do what was best for the state. And because that was their ultimate goal, that goal justified any means. It justified doing heinous things to innocent victims. So we do need to be wary about science that is unbridled, unregulated. Pursuing science or knowledge just for the sake of knowledge is a good, but if it is done without any kind of ethical constraints, it can, unfortunately, history shows us, it can lead to disastrous programs of investigation and also results.
Right. Now, I mean, I think they argued that they were operating under a certain ethic that the individual suffering is not as important as the greater good, which, I mean, many in the world would argue is an not ethical ethic. How do we police ethics?
By continuing to put it on the public's radar. We need to have conversations about what our values are and to have ongoing conversations about what are our convictions, what should be our commitments. This is true not only in the science arena and not only true in the food arena and public health arena, but it's also true in our social arena. What sort of values should be guiding our commitments to vulnerable populations? We need to have these conversations from time to time, and they're going to be uncomfortable, and we need to be comfortable sitting in that discomfort as individuals and as a society. But to defer to political elites, to defer to academic elites, and I'm putting elites in air quotes, by delegating or relegating certain kinds of conversations to others, we absolve ourselves of participating in these conversations that necessarily should involve as many people as possible.
So, changing gears a little bit, What was it that led you initially to the Sinai and Synapses Fellowship?
As somebody who's interested in religion and contemporary issues, the tensions, the dynamic relationship between religion and science has been there from the very beginning, and it's as alive as ever. So this is perhaps the best venue to interact with clergy, professionals, academic, policy people, science people. Everybody's curious about how best to appreciate the wisdom that is derived from religious traditions, as well as insights that can be derived from scientific explorations of the world.
Has there been anything in this fellowship that has surprised you?
The ease with which it is possible to relate in deep ways with people who come from different religious communities, as well as different scientific commitments. That I have found for the many years that I've now been involved with Sinai and Synapse, that the people are really genuinely nice and curious and welcoming and generous and willing to hear somebody else's perspective, even if they don't necessarily agree with it or even fully understand it. And that's been really refreshing, especially in this milieu, this contemporary political milieu here in the United States, where people demean and damn others who are not waving the same kind of flag that they wave.
Yeah, and that's the main criteria for admission into the fellowship is you must be curious and kind. So as we approach the end of our time together, I want to ask you one final question. Feel free to take as much time as you need. The question I've asked every other fellow before you, and that is, what is one thing that you wish everyone knew about the world?
That it's vast. It's big. And because it's so big, you can zoom out and look at it from 30,000 feet and still only see a fraction of it. And you can zoom in and take a microscope to it and dig deep down, but you're only going to see a tiny fraction of it too. It's big. And that when I talk about the world being big, I'm talking about not just the natural world, which is awesome and intricate and fragile, but I'm also talking about the social world. It's also variegated and complicated. And I'm also talking about the world that's within each one of us. There's so much within each person that is still a mystery to be experienced and to be appreciated. And that's one of the things that I hope that all folks can come to really appreciate, is that you can learn new things about yourself. May not be things that you want to be learning, may not be things that you're proud of about yourself, things that you might want to change, but there is always something new to learn about oneself if you are willing to pay attention to it. So the world is vast, and I really do hope that people are willing to be courageous explorers of it.
Thank you for that. That is essentially the synopsis of the book that I've been writing.
Oh, tell me about the book.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being here and for sharing some of the work that you're doing, some of the passion that drives you. And thank you for the work that you are doing through the fellowship. And I look forward to reading and hearing more about what you do.
Well, thank you so much, Zach. It's been a real pleasure and delight talking with you today.